70 AD, the Roman Colosseum. 50,000 spectators were yelling. Within the central sand of the arena, a woman was secured to a timber structure. She was unclothed, panic-stricken. Suddenly, a bull was released, not for her termination, but for a spectacle far more horrific. The guards had constructed a sophisticated, mechanical facsimile of a cow. They pushed the woman inside it and compelled the bull to mount the apparatus. This was an execution, yet it was camouflaged as the myth of Pasiphae, the legendary queen who had engaged in intercourse with a bull. The audience erupted in cheers. Children observed. Senators roared with laughter. Welcome to the world of Roman amusement. This is not fiction. It is authenticated history. The poet Martial was present at the Colosseum's inauguration, and he meticulously documented the event. We saw Pasiphae gerund to the bull, he recorded. The ancient legend received testimony under Caesar. Rome, the most extensive empire in history, was renowned for its legal system, magnificent aqueducts, and philosophy, and this public violation, which was transmuted into family amusement. Today, I am going to expose the most savage, most depraved, and most non-human public events that Rome staged in the arena. These are events that Hollywood would certainly omit, that your educators never referenced, but which the Romans painstakingly recorded. This was not chaos. It was strategic governance, state propaganda, absolute control, and entirely lawful. I'm Crown and Dagger, and here there is no prohibition, only the unvarnished truth Rome would rather you forget. Observe that when historians discuss the Colosseum, they invariably mention valiant gladiators, yet they conceal these narratives. Each week, Crown and Dagger excavates the most unsettling histories the world prefers to disregard. If you seek unvarnished historical accounts, hit like and subscribe because the information that follows is significantly more brutal. Rome, from the 1st through the 4th centuries AD, governed 60 million inhabitants, the largest human empire ever assembled. And every significant urban center shared one characteristic: an amphitheater. Over 250 arenas existed throughout Roman territories. The Colosseum alone accommodated 50,000 onlookers, and it was nearly always filled. I need you to grasp this fundamental point. This was not spontaneous aggression. It was organized demise on an industrial scale. The historian Eutropius estimated that more than 400,000 individuals perished in Roman arenas over the span of 4 centuries. That is the entire population of a city eliminated for spectacle. To commemorate the Colosseum's inauguration, Emperor Titus ordained 100 consecutive days of games. 9,000 animals were butchered. That equates to 90 deaths per day purely for enjoyment. Following his conquest of Dacia, Emperor Trajan sponsored 123 days of contests involving 10,000 gladiators and the mass execution of thousands of prisoners. The philosopher Seneca attended these events and produced a terrifying reflection. I return home more avaricious, more ruthless, more savage because I have been among humans. He observed the midday executions. Convicts were secured to posts, lions were unleashed, and the masses wagered on how long each casualty would continue to scream before expiring. That was considered lunchtime diversion. Why? Because the arena achieved a feat no other state institution could manage. It instilled compliance through gratification. When you observe a man being dismembered, you internalize the consequence for Rome's dissenters. When you applaud someone's demise, you become an accessory, and that shared culpability was the primary objective. According to the historian Cassius Dio, Rome allocated more financial resources to arena amusement than to maintaining roads, schools, or public hospitals. By the 2nd century AD, they had intricate logistics networks procuring lions from Africa, captives from Gaul, and Christians from Judea. It was a structured, scheduled, budgeted system, mortality packaged as amusement, delivered daily to a populace addicted to savagery. What you have just heard was the framework. Now I will reveal the actual occurrences on that sand. the specific spectacles that compelled 50,000 individuals to cheer as human dignity was extinguished before their eyes. We begin with the genesis of it all, a funeral marked by bloodshed. But Rome's elite recognized a different opportunity: absolute control. A funeral accompanied by slaughter demonstrated affluence. A funeral with extraordinary slaughter affirmed dominion. By the 3rd century BC, political figures were utilizing funeral games as campaigning tools. The Senate referred to it as piety. The populace understood it was partisan maneuvering. Even the protective gear communicated narratives. The Samnite gladiator wore equipment that replicated Rome's vanquished enemies. Every strike was a restaging of Roman triumphs. Death became a form of propaganda. Temporary wooden stands were gradually replaced by permanent amphitheaters, veritable temples dedicated to violence, where the act of dying communicated the same message. Rome commands people, legions, and even death itself. If funeral rites initiated the practice, the subsequent phase transformed the arena into Rome's most vicious stage. Because the Romans made a crucial discovery: exotic suffering is more marketable than commonplace demise. Lions imported from North Africa, leopards from the Caucasus region, crocodiles from the Nile, giraffes hauled across deserts. They were not exhibited as marvels, they were condemned as quarry in a celebration of carnage. Romans termed these performances venationes, hunts, but they were purely executions of wildlife itself. Julius Caesar established this trend in 46 BC, exhibiting a giraffe, the first ever seen in Europe. They labeled it a camelopardalis because Rome lacked a name for it. It was inconsequential. The beast was cast onto the sand to be ravaged. The underlying message: if Rome could capture the world's most peculiar fauna alive, it could conquer all. The scale of the mass execution escalated dramatically. At the Colosseum's inauguration, Emperor Titus presided over the demise of more than 9,000 animals in a single festival. Archaeologists have identified bones bearing deliberate marks of starvation. Lions and bears were intentionally weakened beforehand to guarantee a swift, bloody kill. Behind the scenes, the logistics were ruthless. Caravans dragged cages through blistering deserts. Fleets transported them down the Nile. Handlers risked their lives to deliver living prizes to a metropolis that demanded fresh gore with every rising sun. Pliny the Elder cautioned that rare species were disappearing from their native habitats. Lions, leopards, elephants, all driven towards extinction. The Colosseum was more than a stage of mortality. It was an ecological wrecking ball. Animal massacres guaranteed attendance, but Rome required additional thrills. They sought suspense, disparity, contests where the result was predetermined but the agony was genuine. They desired theater disguised as conflict. When you envision a gladiator, you typically imagine two equally matched combatants. The reality was perverse. Rome thrived on imbalance. Contests were deliberately engineered for cruelty. Prisoners and convicts were thrust into the arena, dressed like fools, and given ineffective wooden weapons, and sent to confront skilled, hardened killers. The audience mocked as the doomed flailed uselessly and collapsed. Public execution was masked as sport. The implements became characters themselves. The retiarius fought with a fishing net and a trident against the secutor, whose distinctive helmet was designed to deflect the net. The focus was not on prowess, it was on suspense. Would the net ensnare, or would the blade penetrate? Occasionally, a single gladiator faced multiple antagonists. Other times, entire groups clashed, transforming the arena into a quagmire of blood and mutilated bodies. The helmets were instruments of torture, some severely limited vision, compelling fighters to stumble nearly blind while the spectators roared with amusement. Others were so massive that attempting to lift one's head became agonizing. Armor was not protection, it was punishment. Gladiators were clothed as barbarians, forced to mime Rome's defeated adversaries. Their inevitable loss served as a reminder that the empire always triumphs. Mismatched combat was vicious, but it was not the absolute worst, because Rome reserved a distinct class of victims. These were individuals who were not intended for combat. They were intended to die screaming while the crowd was entertained. By midday, gladiatorial combat gave way to elaborate theatrical productions with death as the main focus. Romans termed this damnation ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Criminals, military deserters, slaves, and prisoners of war became unwilling performers in executions staged as mythological narratives. Each retribution was matched to the offense. Thieves were dismembered by wolves, arsonists were burned alive, and traitors were delivered to lions. Every scene was a lesson in morality, inscribed in actual blood. Lions were starved to a frantic state before release. Bears were chained in pits and goaded into fury. The unpredictability, would the animal strike rapidly or torment its victim, kept the stands roaring for more.
During Emperor Trajan's celebrations after the Dacian conquest, thousands of captives were massacred over 123 days. It was not random violence. It was organized, rhythmic sequences in a dramatic production. Every demise was precisely crafted to keep the audience on edge. The historian Strabo recorded victims secured to posts as wild bulls were released. The animals, trained to attack motion, would gore the prisoners while the crowd placed wagers on the duration of each victim's cries. This was not justice. It was amusement under a veneer of morality. Pause for consideration. 4 spectacles detailed. Thousands deceased, species rendered extinct, human beings reduced to stage props. If you assume this represents the absolute worst of Rome's brutality, you are incorrect. Because the next stage is where executions ceased to be about termination and became pure, sadistic theater. For the condemned, simple death was inadequate. They were required to act out their demise, performing Rome's foundational myths with their own bodies. Prisoners were forced to portray tragic heroes. Orpheus, the musician who charmed wild animals. In the myth, animals sat enchanted. In the arena, a bear was released during the performance and mauled the singer to death. The poet Martial witnessed this. We saw Orpheus. If he had lingered, the beasts would have obeyed, but he was torn apart. Another captive was forced to play Daedalus, suspended on crude wings. He briefly soared before plummeting to the animals below. Martial quipped, "The man must have wished for real feathers." The most grotesque involved Persephone and the bull. One show staged her coupling with a mechanical beast, followed by a mauling that amalgamated execution, degradation, and pornography. Tertullian documented that female captives were occasionally dressed as priestesses and sexually assaulted in front of the crowd before being killed. The message was explicit. Rome owned its myths, just as it owned its population. Heroes, villains, royalty, none were exempt from being rewritten as props in a pageant of death. For the spectators, it was sideshows. For the condemned, it was agonizing conclusions masked in elaborate costumes. For Rome, it was propaganda materialized. Everything discussed so far transpired on dry land in a standard arena, but Rome was dissatisfied. They posed the ultimate question. What if we inundated the arena? What if we introduced the ocean to the desert and compelled men to perish at sea? Mock naval engagements, namachiae, were spectacles of unimaginable magnitude, where water itself became an instrument of destruction. Julius Caesar in 46 BC excavated a massive basin near the Tiber River, filling it with water and replica vessels. Thousands of captives were shoved aboard, instructed to engage in combat as rival navies. They were not actors. They were men condemned to die for applause. Arrows, catapults, steel, a slaughterhouse afloat. Augustus expanded upon this. In 2 BC, he commissioned a basin nearly 2,000 by 1,200 feet, supplied by a dedicated aqueduct simply to maintain the water level. 30 warships clashed, crammed with prisoners fated never to depart alive. The message? Rome commanded seas where no naturally existed. Even the laws of nature yielded to imperial caprice. By 52 AD, Claudius drained Lake Fusina for another Naumachia. When the captives saluted him with Moritere te salutant, those who are about to die salute you, history gained one of its most indelible, haunting phrases. Even the Colosseum possessed channels to flood the floor for naval presentations, only to drain it for combat the following day. Cruelty became an engineering endeavor. The arena never ceased innovating, and as the empire aged, the spectacles grew progressively more depraved. Here is where Rome transgressed every remaining moral boundary. Women were coerced into combat, occasionally unclothed, sometimes against dwarfs or animals. The satirist Juvenal mocked them, yet records verify their genuine fighting participation. Their presence blurred traditional gender roles, but emphasized a darker reality. No one was beyond Rome's insatiable hunger for spectacle. Prisoners were clad in pitch-soaked shirts and ignited. Tertullian wrote bitterly that they served as living torches. These were not mere executions. They were warnings etched into living flesh. Men and women writhed as smoke ascended into the sky, while vendors hawked wine and children played nearby. Crucifixion, a punishment borrowed from the East, was staged inside the arena. Men and women were affixed as wooden crosses while the crowd consumed their midday meal. Death was not rapid. It required hours, sometimes days, and the audience witnessed the entirety of it. Emperors even adopted the gladiator role. Commodus, the ultimate showman, strode into the Colosseum dressed as Hercules, slaughtering hundreds of animals that had been crippled beforehand. He fought gladiators as well, but only with every advantage meticulously rigged. Defeat was impossible. Applause was mandated. According to the historian Cassius Dio, Commodus fought as a gladiator 735 times. Each victory cost the public treasury 1,000,000 sesterces. Christians who refused to renounce their faith were delivered to lions, incinerated alive, or crucified as mass amusement. Their deaths were twisted into public relations initiatives against any philosophy that contested Rome's absolute supremacy. I have covered 11 distinct spectacles, resulting in hundreds of thousands of fatalities. Which one constituted the most profound depravity? The mythological executions where victims enacted their own termination? The living torches? The mock sea battles? Drop your answer in the comments because I want to understand at what exact juncture does entertainment devolve into malice? So what were the consequences after centuries of this? By the late Empire, Rome dedicated more funds to arena games than its military, more on spectacles than on essential infrastructure. Not every person cheered. Seneca confessed the executions hardened him. I return home more avaricious, more ruthless, more savage, because I have been among humans. Violence leaked past the arena walls, corrupting daily existence. For Christians, the amphitheater provided both persecution and validation. Tertullian termed the shows seeds of cruelty, indicting an empire that celebrated injustice as sport. Financially, the games consumed immense wealth. Rulers bankrupted themselves pursuing spectacles grand enough to surpass their predecessors. Culturally, the relentless demand dulled Rome's core. Citizens who once valued discipline now demanded cheap provisions and endless circuses. Juvenal mocked this with his phrase, panem and circasis. The desperation for spectacle revealed how far Rome had strayed from its founding principles. As borders weakened and public funds diminished, the arenas crumbled. By the 5th century, the Colosseum stood vacant. Its sand silent, its roaring crowds vanished. The ethical question remains, could a society that trained its population to delight in suffering truly endure? History answers negatively. If this narrative caused you discomfort, but you remained compelled to listen, hit like now, because it signifies that these unfiltered histories are precisely what you seek. And if you want me to investigate more hideous secrets that books obscure, subscribe, because a new historical nightmare is unveiled every week. Today, the Colosseum stands vast, scarred yet proud. Walk its passages, you might perceive echoes, the clang of metal, the roar of beasts, the unified sound of 50,000 voices rising. The stone is easy to admire. Far more difficult is acknowledging its true function, cruelty rehearsed until it became normalized. Rome's arenas were not fundamentally about bloodshed. They were about control, shaping how citizens perceived, enjoyed, and obeyed power. Every hunt, every execution, every myth reborn in screams served one purpose: to make imperial power seem perpetual. That is the warning inscribed in the ruins. A civilization that glorifies aggression ultimately collapses beneath its own weight of applause. But Rome was not the only empire that transformed death into diversion. There was another civilization that enacted something even more twisted with human sacrifice. Watch the video appearing on your screen now.